1 year ago, hope swept the world as Barack Obama was named the next president of the United States. He vowed that change had come. But 12 months on, some things look alarmingly the same. Has Obama lived up to his promise? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Well, it's hard to believe, but a whole year has passed since Barack Obama gave his victory speech in Grant Park in Chicago in front of a euphoric crowd. For the first time in history, a black man had been voted to the most powerful job in the world. And with his election came the promise of a brave new world. Obama wanted to reach out to Muslim nations, talk to dictators and bring peace to troubled regions. He promised a very different path to that of his predecessor. But 1 year on, confidence in him is declining. The latest survey among Americans found his job approval rating was just 53%. The US is still fighting a war on two fronts. Iran and North Korea still remain defiant, and Obama is accused of losing face in the Middle East because of his lack of progress on the peace process. So, did President Obama offer false hope a year ago? Or is it simply too early to tell? Well, let's see what my guests today think. In Washington, D.C., we have Marvin Weinbaum, a former intelligence analyst in the U.S. Department of State and a current adjunct scholar at the Middle East Institute. Also in Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz is a senior fellow and director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at Hudson Institute. And in Beirut, Rami Khouri, director of the Issam Fares Institute of Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. Gentlemen, welcome to all three of you. Marvin, let me start with you. I know you're a former campaign advisor to Obama. Do you think he created an aura of hope in his campaign, which is just impossible to live up to?
Well, I think there's a strong element of truth in that. Obviously, as we all recognize, the task of governing is a great deal different than saying what you will like to do if elected and what you hope you'll be able to do. The realities of holding power clearly are formidable. Absolutely,
and I guess a year on, governance is one of the things that he's getting to grips with. But it's interesting that the pledges that he made, the promises, there was so much optimism that actually he would make a difference.
Yes, of course. There was just so much desire to see a change from the previous administration that I think that expectations were too high. He helped feed those expectations, surely. But I think in general, even though we've seen him only in office since January, there have been disappointments, and yet I would imagine, as someone who supported him and still does, that it's still too early to pass judgment on this presidency, certainly.
Richard, does Marvin have a point there? Are we being too hard on Obama? Because a lot of the problems he inherited from President Bush.
Yes, he did have a very difficult inheritance, but there were people who perhaps misperceived his electoral campaign as representing a left progressive faction within the American political space, where actually he's very much a centrist, he's very much a technocrat, he's been trying to govern from the center, and so he's had a lot of former Clinton people come in, which wasn't necessarily anticipated. So in a way, some people thought he would govern differently than he has, and that's led to some of the disappointments. But I agree with Marvin that it's premature to judge on the effects of some of his policies.
OK, Rami, let's take a look at some of the problems he did inherit. Let's look at Iraq, for instance. He is doing what he said he was going to do, which was wind down American involvement in Iraq. Let's just take a listen to what he said before he was elected.
I have proposed a responsible, phased redeployment of our troops from Iraq. We will get out as carefully as we were careless getting in.
Rami, is he getting out carefully? He's certainly redeployed the troops back out of cities and towns.
Well, the process of redeployment has started. If it continues, is going to depend on how things develop both in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I think if you take the Middle East as a whole, it's one of the areas where I would say that Obama has actually done quite a lot, but most of it is at the level of mood, style, tone, body language, symbolic gestures, and a few policy changes. Now the Americans and Iranians are negotiating very seriously, high-level talks with the Syrians, a high-level envoy to Arab-Israeli peacemaking, and George Mitchell. There are some areas where the American government has substantially changed or reversed former policies, and his outreach to the Muslim world, as he calls it, the Muslim or to Islam, has been a significant but very symbolic gesture. So he's done a lot in terms of gestures and rhetoric and style. It's too early to judge results, though, and that will take some more time.
Well, we'll talk about what he's done in the specifically with the Middle East peace process in just a second. The point about Iraq, I guess, is that he's changed the focus, the priority of his so-called war on terror, moving it from Iraq to Afghanistan. Is that the right move, do you think?
Well, it depends how he defines what he's doing in Afghanistan, and this is not clear yet. I think there's an incredible amount of debate about Afghanistan now, which was not there when the U.S. went into Iraq at the same level of nuance and specificity. People understood, I think, in retrospect, how reckless getting into Iraq was. So Americans are being much more careful about moving forward on Afghanistan. I think he's now commander-in-chief. He's not the chief candidate. He's commander-in-chief, and he has to act much more responsibly. And I think we're going to see some significant decisions in the next month or so. But we don't know what those decisions are. The likelihood is the U.S. cannot militarily prevail in Afghanistan and is likely to shift very quickly to an Iraqi-style phase withdrawal, I would guess.
Marvin, Obama clearly knows that Afghanistan is a long-term problem. It's a deeply unpopular one with American voters. Do you think that Rami's right, that Afghanistan is going to be a real issue for Obama in the long term?
Oh, it is. It certainly is an issue, and one that he's going to find increasingly difficult. Whether, in fact, there will be a drawdown remains to be seen. The president has said, at least in the short term, that he's not moving to reduce the number of forces, so that the question is how much of an increment should there be over the number that he has authorized, some 68,000. It is an area in which there's both continuity from the past and some discontinuities, and we could get into that, but there are certainly one of the major changes, and this again is, as was indicated here elsewhere, a matter of style and tone. His approach to Hamid Karzai and the central government in Afghanistan takes on a very different character. With Bush, it was a very personal relationship between himself and the president of Afghanistan. With Obama, it is certainly a much more business-like approach, and this has caused some difficulties between the two presidents.
Okay, well, this is what Obama said on the campaign trail about Afghanistan. He was addressing the issue of terrorism, and he pledged to tackle the safe havens in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Afghanistan is the central front on terror, that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have reconstituted themselves. They have safe havens along the Afghan-Pakistan border. Our troops are doing an outstanding job, and many coalition troops are doing an outstanding job. But frankly, we need a more serious effort on the part of the Afghan government and President Karzai to get out of Kabul, to start the development process.
Richard, some critics would say that Obama's actually increased tensions in that border area because of the growing number of drone attacks and this the debate over civilian deaths, particularly in the Pakistan territory.
Yes, the number of drone attacks has increased, but that actually has appeared to be somewhat effective. They've killed several important al-Qaeda leaders, plus Pakistan Taliban leader Masood was killed. And the Pakistani government has so far been very cooperative. They succeeded in the SWAT counteroffensive. There's now expectations that they'll launch an offensive in South Waziristan. He could have gone further. There were some people who wanted to send in special forces, troops, to fight the Taliban on the ground. On the whole, it's been a successful, not without tension relationship with Pakistan, but so far it's been holding well.
I have heard that speculation,
so
that there could be the question of American troops going into Pakistan, but that would mean he's fighting a war on 3 fronts.
No, he won't do that. There was perhaps one incident when the Bush administration sent in a special force raid, although it's not clear who authorized that, into northwest Pakistan. But since they stopped that, because they seem to have worked out as modus vivendi, in which the U.S. will rely on the drone strikes, and over time, I think there's an attempt to give Pakistani government its own independent capacity to launch such strikes, so that the American role will diminish.
So do you see things changing in the next year? Because clearly one of the big fears that the world has is the growing instability in Pakistan.
Yes, there was a short deterioration, but the situation seems to be on the upswing at the moment in Pakistan, though there is this worrisome development of the large number of suicide bombers that are occurring throughout Pakistan. And there is still the unresolved issue of the Pakistan-based extremists who want to engage in operations in India. And that the India-Pakistan tensions is something that President Obama said he wanted to solve when he was campaigning, but they haven't really made much of an effort in that because they've been distracted by other issues in South Asia.
Okay, gentlemen, let's take a look at the perpetually impossible to solve situation, the Middle East peace process. On the subject of that crisis, Obama endorsed a 2-state solution, but during his campaign, he said the U.S. would only act as a catalyst in the peace process.
That's an issue that has to be dealt with the parties involved, the Palestinians and the Israelis, and it's not the job of the United States to dictate the form in which that will take, but rather to support the efforts that are being made right now to resolve these very difficult issues.
Now, Rami, one of the most damaging accusations facing Obama is that for all his tough words and the pressure he's supposed to be exerting on Israel, he's actually backtracking, particularly on the issue of settlements, and of course, nothing's been achieved.
Well, that's true, and he also tried to put pressure on the Arab countries to make gestures of normalization to Israel and got nowhere there. The Arabs turned him down. The Israelis turned him down on the settlement freeze. We still really don't know what is the U.S. position on the substantive issues. All we know is that he appointed Mitchell, he sent Hillary Clinton twice, and he asked the settlement freeze and the signs of recognition from the Arabs. Beyond that, we have no idea how much political capital he's willing to spend. What is going to be the domestic political consequence of this on him? Will he be threatened by pro-Israeli political forces? How much is he willing to lean on the parties? And how does he define a U.S. catalytic role? Will the U.S. put out its own position and say, this is what we think is a fair settlement? So most of what the U.S. should do or wants to do on Arab-Israeli issues still hasn't been done. So it's really a bit early to judge. What we can say is that there is some flip-flopping, but hey, that's what politicians do. They react to what is realistic, what is possible. They tried one approach, it didn't work. They're probably now rethinking what should they do next. Hillary Clinton, in typical Clintonian style, has confused the situation with her comments in Israel and in Morocco, and we'll see what happens next. So this is very much a developing story, and the American position should be clarified certainly by the end of winter if this is going to move.
Well, it's interesting on this situation that the Israelis seemed quite taken aback by Obama's early rhetoric about his insistence that that settlement activity freeze, and he did, of course, appoint George Mitchell, the envoy. So there was very much a different feeling about how things could progress, and arguably the whole thing galvanized the region, didn't it?
Well, yes, and what was different was that the United States actually was trying to take a middle-of-the-road, even-handed, activist position and to press the Israelis press the Arabs, and try to implement the rule of law, which is that colonization is a crime according to international law, and Israel should stop building colonies and settlements. This is unusual for the United States. So he tried this, and he got pushback, very strong pushback from the Israelis, and he pulled back a little bit. So, you know, his call to freeze has now been frozen by the Israelis. We'll see what he does next. But there was a dramatic, different American approach to Arab-Israeli peacemaking, but this is a process that has just started. We really need to give him a little bit more time. Much more important, I think, is the Goldstone report, Judge Richard Goldstone's report on Israeli and Hamas behavior in the Gaza fighting last year. And the American rejection of that is a very bad sign, because that was an even-handed report looking at both sides, anchored in the rule of law, done by a very respected international jurist.
Yeah,
so
that's a really good point,
area,
Rami,
I think,
actually.
that is much more damaging to Obama in the short and medium term, because the rest of the world is going to keep pushing it.
What do you think about that, Marvin? I mean, the early optimism over his reaching out to the Arab world countered by the US rejection of the Goldstone report.
Well, that's not received as much emphasis here in Washington, obviously, as it has in the Middle East. He has strong pressures from domestic groups here to at least see those parts of the report which seem to be less than even-handed as it is viewed by some here, because of the fact that it stressed the wrongdoing of the Israelis, but failed to give as much attention to what is seen to be the actions of those in Gaza. I really defer to my colleagues on this subject. My specialty really resides much more in the northern tier.
Okay, Marvin, let's have a look at Iran and the situation surrounding Iran. One of Obama's early campaign pledges was to, as he put it, tighten the screws on Iran diplomatically over its nuclear program.
The United States has to gather up others in the region, as well as internationally, to apply pressure on Iran. But it's very difficult for us to do so when we haven't shown a willingness to engage in the sort of direct negotiations with Iran that would give them carrots and sticks for a change in behavior.
Richard, on the one hand, he's talking about reaching out and negotiating with the Iran leadership. On the other hand, he's threatening harsher sanctions. This is a country that's already been under sanctions for 30 years. So is there much divergence from his predecessor's policy towards Iran?
Well, I think there's a significant divergence in tone. He gave, as you recall, a New Year's greeting to the Iranian leadership. He was actually trying to restrain his criticism of the abhorrent behavior of the Iranian government over the elections, at least initially, in order to try not to burn bridges in a negotiating effort. Unfortunately, because of the way the domestic situation is turning out in Iran, the overtures have not been accepted, and now we're seeing a walk back what I thought was a very promising initiative of perhaps cooperating on enriching a large percentage of Iranian fuel, and that I thought would be a good confidence-building measure, but it appears the Iranian government's walking back from that now. So in Iran, I think he did what he said he was going to do. He tried for an overture. He tried to reach a negotiating settlement, and is trying to reach a negotiating settlement over the nuclear issue. But he's ended up with a very difficult Iranian partner, because the problems we've had before with Iran have been compounded because of the domestic chaos there.
Rami, is that how you see it? A promising initiative, and it's actually Iran that's been rebuffing it?
No, I would disagree with Richard on much of that analysis. I think it's true that there has been a significant change in Obama's approach, and I applaud him. He's negotiating with the Iranians. There has been regression in the domestic situation, and so for the government, at least, the Iranian government in Iran. But what's going on now is a very serious negotiation. And, you know, the Iranian, I wouldn't put all the blame on the stress inside Iran. I think the Iranians are sitting there negotiating with an American government, and it's Security Council members and Germany that is constantly saying we're going to tighten the pressure, we're going to have heavy sanctions, and we're going to have crushing sanctions, and this is not a serious negotiating posture for the United States if they want the Iranians to take them seriously. So if the U.S. is going to threaten Iran, Iran is going to backpedal. If they're going to sit and negotiate seriously, they will make a breakthrough as they did in Geneva and Vienna. But this is a negotiation. It's not an American dictate of what Iran needs to do. But I think there is a significant change. I think the Americans and Iranians and the others, the Europeans, are really involved in this in a serious way. But it will only succeed if the core interests of both sides are taken into consideration. And that is a process that hasn't been fully consummated, but they're moving in that direction.
Marvin, I want to bring you in here because this concept of addressing threats, nuclear threats from countries that don't seem to respond to Obama's overtures include North Korea. Obama has been struggling to bring them back to six-party talks. I mean, how do you assess his approach to this problem?
Well, let me say about Iran, comment on Iran, that it is really debatable whether the sanctions are merely bargaining tools, because there's a real doubt here whether even in the implementation of those sanctions that very much would be gained. There certainly is a change, as it has been suggested here, in the tone, but there is a great deal of debate going on here because of the fact that it sometimes seems as if the Iranians cannot decide among themselves what in fact they are prepared to do. I just see this as not stringing on forever, because although I think we're in a process, there are a lot of pressures here that this process not go on indefinitely.
But do you think Obama has got trapped into this path of I mean, he talks about carrot and stick. There seems to be a lot of stick and not too much carrot, rather than take the path that, say, China and Russia have done, which is engaging much more in trade and dialogue with the Iranian leadership?
Well, they have some particular reasons which have to do, in fact, with their own economic interests, which keeps them from perhaps being more demanding on Iran. I don't know whether they necessarily would be the model for how one should engage Iran. There are real concerns here about what the Israelis may do if this drags on indefinitely, and a sense here that that has to be part of what is driving the United States and others towards something of a resolution of this as quickly as they can.
Clearly a lot of challenges facing poor old Obama. Very quickly, Richard, do you think that over the next 12 months we'll be applauding his performance?
Well, there are some areas where I think he's made great achievements, or at least done better than might have been the case, but we haven't really talked about it. I think relations with Russia have been on the upswing.
Exactly, managing to get that arms reduction treaty on the table.
Right, and that feeds into the Iran and potentially the Korea questions you raised earlier. Although the problem we've seen, even with Russia and China, their influence in the case of Iran and Korea, North Korea, is limited by the nature of these governments. So there might be other areas where we're going to see beneficial fallout from that improvement rather than Iran. Although again, the Russians have not given the Iranians the air defense missile system, the S-300s, that people fear might precipitate an Israeli attack, and that might be due to the diplomacy we've seen, particularly the cancellation of the missile deployment, missile defense systems that were planned for Eastern Europe that were so upsetting the Russians.
OK, well, gentlemen, we've given President Obama a pretty hard time. I'll see you all back here in 12 months to assess his performance over the next year. Dr. Marvin Weinbaum, Richard Weitz and Rami Khouri, thank you all very much indeed. And thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments. Email us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. But for the moment, from me, Shuli Ghosh, bye-bye for now.